Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. In about a week, I will be going to stay at a monastery for a silent retreat. This is something I try to do at least once a year and have been doing since before I became a priest. The first time I did it, I was scared of being with people I'd never met before and not talking. I mean, that just seemed crazy. And yet it also was strangely attractive. And I'm not sure what other word to use to describe that feeling. I longed for the quiet and trusted that somehow I would adjust in a restorative way to the rhythm of a new community. And somehow through that, I would be drawn closer to reality, to the God in whom I believe we live and move and have our being. For me, retreat is about being present, and I am particularly grateful to be able to do it this time of year. If you are a church-going person, you know that Easter is right around the corner. And yes, that is a big day in the life of the church, and certainly for us clergy. It is a huge, wonderful, glorious celebration of new life, resurrection, the good news of God's inexhaustible mercy and love. But before we get to that day, there is a pretty intense week called Holy Week. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe not. But if I was explaining this week to someone who didn't know anything about church or Christianity or Jesus, I would say it's a week where we're asked to be present, to bear witness to some really hard stuff, to a story about someone we love who is dying and our inability to stop it. It's a week where we are invited to feel the discomfort of vulnerability and to also recognize in ourselves the ways in which we have betrayed people we love, or how we don't show up all the time when we know people need us, and our own feelings of being overwhelmed or scared and ashamed. The story in and of itself is the exact same every year, but for me, it is never the same because I'm not the same. Today, I am talking with the Reverend Jonah Kendall, an Episcopal priest I have known for a long time. And I need to tell you a little bit about what it is we are going to talk about. Jonah shares a story of a very difficult and painful time in his life when his family lost a child. And I need to tell you that before you listen, so that you can choose to listen or not, because you and I need to take care of ourselves. Know when it is we can be present to a difficult story, and when it's better that we not. For me, this is a very Holy Week conversation. And I want to thank Jonah so much for the courage and vulnerability of talking with me about this experience, for sharing and being real about the sorrow and also the healing. One more thing before I get started, I just want to give you a heads up that yes, I am going on retreat, and I am going to be taking a little retreat, a break from recording and releasing podcast episodes for a short season. Going to take a little time to reflect and reset, and I know, start again. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope that if Easter is something you're walking towards right now, well, I hope you have a joyful Alleluia celebration. Okay, here's my conversation. Hi there, Jonah Kendall.
Hey, Ariane, it's great to be with you today.
It is great to be with you too. It's always great to be with you. It was great to get started in this career in ministry, working with you. And I'm delighted that you are going to be on my podcast.
Yeah, I've been chomping at the bit.
Well, I do want to start by saying that you and I had a conversation about a week ago that we recorded, and it was a perfectly fine conversation.
Yeah, it was.
It was. And then you gave me a call and we talked a little bit more. And we talked a little bit more about how hard it is to be real, I think, sometimes with who we are and some of the stories and experiences in our life, and how you felt there were some things you could share that you didn't share, but maybe would be good to share.
Yeah, absolutely, Ariane. Yeah, we had a great talk. And, for those of you who are listening, and Ariane and I have known each other for a long time. We've had the privilege to be at the same church twice. Once when Ariane was a parishioner and I was just a new priest in New York City. And then after Ariane's ordination, I hired her.
Yes. Jonah was my first boss, everybody. I worked with him at a wonderful church I've mentioned before, the Church of St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Durham, North Carolina, my first altar, my first cure. And I think it's important to say, actually, we were brought together to work together because a mentor, Bert Drazel, who is now of blessed memory, strongly suggested to me to go work with you. And I have a feeling he might have said to you, hey, you might consider calling Ariane.
And he was probably more direct than that.
I'm sure
was more direct. You need to call Ariane. That would be great. Let's do this kind of thing.
And one of the things I like to joke about now is, you see, I'm a little bit older than Jonah and had some career experience outside of the church before becoming a clergy person. And I say in all the truth that, when I started working with Jonah, I really thought I knew so much. And it was hard working, like, quote unquote, for someone, who is younger than me and very different experience. And, I think about our working together and everything I learned from you frequently, very frequently.
Thank you, Ariane.
But I gave him a lot of grief when we worked together.
Yeah, and you were the first person that I was a supervisor for, right? I was a new, I wasn't a new rector, but I was new rector with the opportunity of having an associate. And so that was really eye-opening for me, and I learned a lot. And I think ultimately we worked with each other.
I agree.
There were a few things, just being new that I was helpful to kind of guide you with. But I wanted to say all this just because, we did have a really fruitful conversation the other day. But then afterwards I was thinking, there's some stuff that we didn't really talk about, and how easy it is to kind of compartmentalize life. And we were talking a lot about ministry. And so you kind of get into that mold of thinking about sort of professional life. And, the hope was that we would talk about that, but also talk about our real journeys. And so I realized, I said, Ariane, there's some stuff we can get into. And we've shared so much together, both professionally, but even personally, being with me through some of my most difficult periods. And, I've obviously been with you through some of yours. So, yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Well, so who were you when you were at St. Philip's when we were working together? How many years had you been ordained a priest?
At that point in time, so I got there in 2008. I was ordained 2001, so 7 years.
That's significant. 7 years.
I had 2.5 to 3 years as an assistant curate back then. That's what we were called, or I was called, in New York City at Holy Trinity, where we were. And then I had about 4.5 years in Harrison in Westchester County, suburbs of New York. And that was a smaller parish where I was the sole priest. And then went to St. Philip's in Durham in 2008. So I had been ordained about 7 years at that time, and I guess I had some rich experiences when I got that job.
Well, yeah, St. Philip's, I think is even bigger now, in part because of your leadership. And it was a pretty big church then. Did that feel daunting to you at the time?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was everything I wanted at that point in time. My wife is from North Carolina, and so I was interested in going there, going into a new place away from where I had grown up. I'd always been in and around New York City my whole life. And so this was a chance to go out into a new environment. And it was this great church, which was pretty big, about 300 or so on a Sunday, and in a very gritty urban environment, which is something I really felt called to do at that point in time, to really have a ministry that had practical significance in terms of witnessing, to God's love in a community where it was needed.
What do you think you were kind of most scared about? Like, what was the most anxiety producing for you, to start off in such a prominent leadership role?
I think that a couple of things. I think the first was the administrative responsibility. I felt pretty good about, I'd had a lot of experience with church, both through the ministry I had started, but then also with my father having been a priest. I had seen a lot. And so I felt comfortable about what a church could be doing in that kind of a community. And I felt pretty confident with my vision. But no, I was concerned about the administrative reality of overseeing a staff, right? Which was about 7 or 8, all the financial responsibility that would go along with that, and just wanting to make sure, because that was an area I'd had some experience when I was in New York at All Saints in Harrison, but it was such a smaller church that it just wasn't comparable. So that was one of my biggest anxieties. And then along with the fact that, this was a prominent church, and I wanted to make sure that during my tenure, I could keep that going, right? I didn't want to be the mistake. I didn't want to take us in the wrong direction. There were a lot of really, really smart people at that church connected to Duke University and, preaching to that community. So those were some of my real fears, to be honest.
I remember sitting with you. We had moved to Durham, which is someplace I never thought I would ever live. And I had just signed mortgage papers, which, if anything, made me feel like an adult that I wasn't prepared for more than wearing a collar. It was signing mortgage papers. And I remember sitting with you with the box in your office that I had brought to put in my new office and talking with you. I was a deacon, right? I hadn't even yet been ordained a priest. That was coming because I started in the summer, and that was going to happen in September. And I remember saying to you, do you understand? I have no idea how to do this job. Do you? I remember saying, sure, seminary, sure, I have a call, sure, I've been to church, but the collar and what I'm supposed to do in terms of being a priest. And I'm pretty sure I just kind of burst into tears because I really felt overwhelmed with not knowing how to, what you just said, like you want to be a certain way and you don't know how you're going to be it. And you said a prayer for us together and you just talked about being a person.
Yeah. And I remember that, and I've now been ordained over 20 years and I still say that from time to time. Like, what am I doing? Do I know what I'm doing? And I appreciate it. I guess the words that I offered in that moment were helpful to you. And I think maybe I was just speaking from what I've come to trust, which was that, we're going to go through this experience, and we've been trained to say certain things, or we've been given a knowledge about the tradition of our church and the message of it. But ultimately, we're going to have to trust on our humanity, because at the heart of it, a church community is a collection of people, and we're just going to be walking our lives together. And so, and I think actually that's where some clergy get into trouble, is that they too much want to assert a sense of authority, or they want to project some idea of what they think a priest should be. And I don't think that always comes across as being particularly authentic. And, I think the authority is already there by virtue of being, hired, called. I think people will allow that already. You don't have to demonstrate that. And then I think people just want to know you're compassionate, you're real, you're human. And that you got something to say, but that you can do it within the context of what it really means to be a person, I think.
Did you come to that? Was that sort of always a part of you and what you felt at the beginning? Or was that something that you saw in a church community, or even with your dad or other clergy? Because you must have been around some with a dad who was a priest.
You want to know, honestly?
Yeah.
And I think this is probably one of the only times I can answer a question this way, but it's the absolute truth. I think it came back. I think it goes back to a sense I had as a little kid. And the reason I say that is I met a lot of clergy when I was a kid. And there was just this innate sense of like, this person feels genuine and real and this person doesn't.
Yep.
And it literally was very clear,
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I think everybody listening knows exactly that sense of intuitive knowing. Children have it, and we all have it. And some of us come to reclaim it, I think, get reacquainted with it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think it was a sense of that. And I think I coupled that with, okay, these folks that don't seem to be that I'm not resonating with, seem to be taking their job just overtly serious. So I put those things together, and maybe that kind of guided me a little bit. And then I had great role models, my father, and then some of his good friends, Bert Drazel, who we talked about earlier, who I think was very genuine. Yeah, I think that helped.
I remember one of the things you really impressed upon me. I didn't really understand like what pastoral visiting was. I mean, I understood it in the context of like sort of crises, but I didn't really understand what creating relationships with people in a parish was. And just the importance of just making simple connections and being consistent and letting people know, like, hey, you want to get coffee? I mean, I didn't grow up in a church. Right. I grew up Roman Catholic, and we went to church, but that's different. And that place was where I learned what forming a community could be like.
In terms of reaching out and connecting and talking. And
in terms of in terms of like, that's what church is. Like, sure, there's Sunday, and there's worship, and that's great. And the programs or the ministries we do in the world. But church is actually this group of people that comes together because God brought us together, and we form relationships, even though we might not have chosen these relationships outside of this place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's where it all plays out in those interconnections. And I think ultimately it goes back to Jesus. I mean, ultimately all I think he did was cultivate relationships and bring transformation through relationships, healing, redemption, insights, empowerment. I think that all came through Jesus being intentional with people and really being real and present. It carries a lot.
It does carry a lot. And that's one of the things, one of the things I'm really grateful from working with you is being present for your preaching, which was storytelling preaching. That's how I would say it. And
I think that's right.
And, the academic mindset that you come out of seminary with, I think really privileges academic and intellectual preaching, which is fine, but I don't really think it moves hearts. And I personally feel usually when I was utilizing it, it was to show somebody how smart I was, or to prove prove that I could stand in a pulpit, that I had the right.
Your justification, right? For
exactly.
Being
and then, all the words you just use now when you're talking about Jesus and redemption and like, these are all words. They're all concepts of some sort. But unless you can speak from the heart about what that means in your actual lived life, what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, that has been and remains my goal, is to try to preach in a way that creates a bridge and a direct relationship between the stories that we're encountering, which are 2,000 years old. So first century life and 21st century life. And we do that through our lived experience. And I think that if the authority or truth of our tradition, I think, is born out of the proclamation, but it's also born out of, for as much as life has changed in many respects, it hasn't changed at all. I mean, we're still asking the same fundamental questions about what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be in relationship with others? Where is it that we find meaning and fulfillment? Are we alone? Are we okay? How do we navigate difficult times? I mean, none of that's changed. We still ask those basic elemental questions.
Yeah.
In each new generation. So the stories and the sharing of life, I think it's all about trying to help folks to recognize the direct relationship between the two. And it's good if you can. I think our training is really important because, in order to do that, you've got to understand the biblical stories, so you have to be able to know what's behind the passages.
So, we're in this community, and yes, it is all lived experienced, all, living into these stories we're creating. And one of the things we talked about when you called me after that first conversation was one of the painful lived experiences that you and your family went through. rather early. I think that was your second year, maybe. That was, the date exactly, I'm sure.
Yeah, because since you were there,
I was there.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been within, I think, 2 or 3 years of me having been there. And what Ariane's referring to is that my wife Katy and I, we lost a child through a late term. So we're talking like 8-month, almost 9-month full stillbirth. A son that we named Gabriel, that one day was kicking in Katy's womb, and then the next morning wasn't. And we never got an explanation, or there is no known explanation for what happened. But that was a really, really painful experience, from which ran the gamut from the death of a child, to the death of a whole host of expectations about what Katy and I thought this child would mean for us. I had a daughter. My firstborn was a daughter, and she went through that experience as well, and being a parent with her. And then there was, on the church level, realizing that I was really in a dark place, and needing the support of the congregation, of people, basically. That was a change, because I was supposed to be the one that was there for them. But really, it just goes back to this really painful time. And you were there, Ariane, and you were very supportive, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you. And I'm very grateful you're willing to talk about this, because, one of the things that I set this whole podcast project up for was for people to really see priests and clergy as the full human beings that we are. And to see, because I think they really see a side of us, of course they do, just like we see side of all professional people. But are you willing to kind of go back in time with me to that, and me to talk through some of my memories? Yeah. Of that experience in particular.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I remember being with you, and your family was there for Pentecost, and we did baptisms, and Katy was radiant, and 8 months pregnant. And it was such a joyous day. It was it was a beautiful, beautiful, joyous day. And that it was Monday morning, and I'm sitting in my office, and you open the door and you say, I got to go to the doctor. The heart's not beating. And I'm like, what? I mean, I couldn't even understand anything. And you were like, the heart's not beating.
Yeah.
And you flew out as you had to. And I just remember thinking, wait, what? That's not possible.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said you started that by talking about the day before, because that evening we were all out in North Carolina, so it's really warm. This is like end of May, June, and we were all kind of dancing on the back porch, and the baby was kicking. And then the next morning, Katy said, the baby isn't kicking, something strange. I said, it's all right. I didn't know anything. I thought, well, he will. We knew it was a boy. He will. And she said, no, Jonah, at this point, there's supposed to be X number of movements that you can feel within a period of time. And I thought, okay, well, just call the doctor, let me know. So I went to work. And then, Ariane, I got this call where Katy was just in tears and telling me that the baby had died. And I had not in any way expected this to happen. And so I just remember, telling you and then leaving, and just this just incredible grief and emptiness just overwhelming me. It's I'll say this for, people are listening to this, stillbirths are actually quite common. We never talk about them though, which is because a stillbirth is different than a miscarriage. I mean, it's all bad. It's all got its hardships. This is not any kind of comparison, but in a stillbirth, it's late term, and it's something that isn't talked about very much, but it's quite common. So if you're someone that's been through this, you're not alone. I've been there too, as as many others have as well. And so we went to the hospital, and then so you're dealing with the shock of having lost this child. And then you're told, okay, you're going to have to deliver the fetus. And so, because if you were to do a cesarean, there's the complications that could create problems for a future pregnancy. And so we had to go through that, and not like, yes, Katie was induced, but that doesn't mean 5 minutes later it's over. I mean, it went on and on and on for a long period of time. And so that was really devastating. And I do remember you, sorry.
No. I remember going to the hospital, which I think is what you were about to say.
Yeah, you came.
But I could not believe, I mean, I don't know what I knew it had to be. I mean, I knew she had to deliver the baby, but I could not believe she had to be on the same floor, and that, she had to go through that experience in the same way if it had come to full term and Gabriel had been a healthy child. I remember I came with, she's now a bishop, but was our colleague at the time, Bishop Ann Hodges Koppel.
Right.
Because she was over at St. Luke's, and I was grateful for her presence, because I, as always in these situations, all of us know this feeling of there's nothing we can do. How can we possibly be of help? And all we want to do is make everything better and go away. And I remember Anne brought chrism and oil, and she prayed with Katy. She blessed her and blessed Gabriel and said, "You are exactly the mother that Gabriel needed you to be." And I just was stunned at her ability to have words and be so, and it was obviously very healing. Obviously, this is still very very powerful experience.
I'm feeling it too.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the aspect too of this podcast is clergy run a gamut of feelings, just like all human people. And then not only do we have, our experiences that we feel our way through, but I think we truly try and be empathetic, with other people and are present and feeling with them in that way. And in doing this again and again, just become more and more aware of the incredible sanctity and gift of life. It's just such an amazing gift.
It's so precious. When just this idea of being precious. When Gabriel had died, I had this white undershirt on that I guess I was wearing when he was delivered, and I was then holding him, and that shirt ended up getting stained with blood and whatnot, as a newborn infant would have. And when I gave Gabriel to the person at the mortuary, because we had him cremated, I had him wrapped in that shirt. And I remember thinking as I was doing that I remember praying to God and saying, God, being distraught and sad, and also just saying, I recognize, just the absolute precious nature of life, and how I don't want to take anyone or anything for granted. And that we have this gift, and it's just one of those moments of clarity where you just see it all and realize. And then, of course, since then, there are the days that I've completely forgotten that, but I do come back to it again and again, that image of having him in this t-shirt, and just remembering just this sense of how precious life is, and that, we needed to really, really every day just be so grateful for it, because you just don't know. The other thing I wanted to say too is that, I remember Anne coming. I certainly remember you being there, and I do remember Anne and, the blessing. And the two things about that is that, for the most part, because we had lots of visitors, family and stuff that came down, I don't really remember what anybody said. It's not, I wouldn't sit here and say, Ariane, the best part about you being there was when you offered up this word, and you made all sense, and you made sense of it. No, it was that you were there, and it was your love, Anne's love, and feeling the sense of God in all of your presence. And that's really, what got me through. You ask all the questions, why, how, and honestly, there's no answers to those things. And yet I did find a way through it, through the support and the love that I felt of God through the people that were simply willing to be present with us during that time. And interestingly enough, there were a lot of people that I thought I'd hear from that I didn't.
Yes.
Because I think it's hard. I think it's, and that's very human, right? We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. And I just am so grateful for the ones who just said, I'm imagining, said to themselves, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. This is going to be terrible, but you know what? I'm just going to show up. And
Just what you just said.
Thank you, Ariane, for that.
You're most welcome. And what you said is so important. First of all, there are these people that you think they're going to show up and they don't for whatever reason. And it's not even judgmental because whatever.
It's
and, if you're a new clergy person out there, they give us so much stuff that we're supposed to do with our, Eucharistic kits and our books and our prayers. And, don't stress. Like, if you show up as a genuine human being who simply says the Our Father, say whatever you want to say you can't even pray. It doesn't matter. They just want to see exactly that genuine showing up in love and support.
Yeah. And, I think really for us, and Katy's a deeply faithful person too. This wasn't a moment for us where we felt abandoned by God. I know it sounds like a paradoxical statement, right? Losing a child and never getting an explanation, and yet not feeling. I just felt God's presence, and the faith that I had to help me to help carry me through. And and by that I don't mean like that everything was okay. It wasn't. It was really hard, but it just helped. It helped me to keep going. Yeah, that was really hard.
And then
but I'm grateful for, and you know what I will say though, Ariane, I will say one thing. I also, in that experience, I realized the power of some of our ritual. When there aren't any words, that the rituals are really important. So Anne's blessing, we baptized him. And, I didn't do that because I was thinking he needed that to save his soul. I did it as a sign of love for the gifts that we had for this child in the way that we had him for as long as we had him. And that was an important way of acknowledging his real existence, that he really was real to us, that this was our son. And then going through the funeral and all that, as difficult as it was, it really helped us. Can I say one last thing?
Well, you can say more than that. Yes.
And it's about Bishop Curry.
Oh, sure. Because I love.
So Bishop Curry, the now presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, was at that time the Bishop of North Carolina. So he was our bishop. And so, he came to visit us at our home. And I got to tell you, this to me will forever be Bishop Curry. I know everyone thinks of the royal wedding and his sermons and just his wonderful spirit and faith and the joy that he inspires, but he just sat on our couch, and he kind of sat in a way that, like, your pants kind of ride up. So his shoes and his socks, and then there was like probably about a foot of shin and both legs being exposed, and then his pants, because the couch kind of was down, and he just sat there and he listened and he prayed, and he was so tender to my daughter Scout, and he was just so genuine. And to me, that's what a bishop should be, and a person of faith, and that is just an incredible gift. And I felt really loved. So I think he drank a beer too.
Yeah, because he's a guy. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's just.
Like, I think he drank a beer with us.
Yeah, if there's anything else, besides getting to work with you, that first church, I got to be in North Carolina, and he was the first bishop I got to be in the diocese with as a priest. And I could not believe the genuine way in which he interacted with, I felt like such a nobody, and he never treated me like a nobody and was very real. One of the things that I also took note of during that time was both the way you derive support from the congregation, but in your time, you kept some distance from the congregation for a while too. The funeral was private.
Yeah, well, actually, that there was one thing Bishop Curry said that really stuck with me that day, because he was there to be a consoling presence for us, but he was also checking in on one of his priests to find out how's Jonah doing, and how do we want to navigate this going forward. And he said to me, Jonah, just really be aware of your triggers. Some of them you can anticipate and some you won't, and you just got to pay attention to that, and that'll help kind of guide you. And as a result of that, I just knew I needed a little space from the church, because I wanted to be able to come back and feel pretty, secure with kind of where I was, and that I'd had some experience to know what would trigger a response for me. Not that I ever could totally, you can't master that, but self-awareness is really important, and that's what he was saying. And so we had a small. I didn't want this to be a big church event, right? So this is for a family, and so we had a small service at St. Philip's with family, and then some of my close friends and Caty's were together, and that was really special. So I was talking about my faith earlier, and I didn't feel abandoned by God, and I felt like my faith was able to both get me through prayer and just the tradition and hope of it, to get through each day, and then to be able to see in the presence of others the presence of God. I think that all really helped. And then I also think that it also allowed me to stay open to what ultimately came to be a new hope and a new light, right? Like that in the midst of what was so dark, and at the time thought, how can life repair itself? How will it ever be the same? It won't be the same. It's going to be different. But like, how will it come back again? And sure enough, it did. And there was we had another child, another daughter, Amelia Beau, and one of the amazing things about that experience was that the nurse that took care of Caty when she went through delivering Gabriel was the very same nurse that was there to help her when she delivered Beau, and her name was Beau, and that's why we named Beau. Her name Beau, because of that. And that was a sign, that light. I mean, from a spiritual, I think God carries us through. And I really believe that. Sure, it was a hospital, and so, okay, you could have the same person be there. I guess that can happen. We could look at it that way. But I just really felt this sense of this new birth coming, and this steadfast presence that was with us. And it was really powerful. So, it's about learning to go through those experiences, and even in the midst of it, holding fast and knowing that, and being open to one day a new light shining. It doesn't take away the pain and the loss that we went through, but there is a resurrection. There is.
The last conversation I had was with Erica von Haren, who is an Episcopal priest. She's in Arizona. In the conversation we had, I think after the recording, she talked about James Finley and contemplative, deep contemplative. And he has a quote, "God protects us from nothing, yet sustains us in everything."
Yeah, that's so well said. That is so well said. This past Sunday was the raising of Lazarus, and there was a quote that I read, Gail O'Day, and she had this quote about the phrase resurrection. Jesus says, "I am resurrection, I am life." And she was saying, it's such a mistake to just think about that as being life after death, because the wonder of God is that, okay, we go through deaths every day in life, but God is there constantly, raising us in the midst of it. Quote you just shared made me think of that, because I think that's true.
And I think that's also one of the reasons for the rituals. The rituals
that's
are
right.
Kind of like just remember. I know you can't feel it. I know it doesn't seem it, but the ritual, that's definitely.
And it gives language and expression to feelings, thoughts, experiences that perhaps we're not sure how to express. But I think you just need to be able, but in order to do that, you gotta have an outlet to process this stuff. All right. And I think that's really central.
Completely agree. So what are you going to be sharing this Easter? You got
Well, I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten there yet. So this is one of the tricky things, right? So what I know right now, I think the two ideas that I'm thinking about, Maundy, Thursday, I'm always struck with Jesus's presence of mind, to know that he was going to be facing this incredible ordeal, the worst, experience one could have, the sense of impending death and the horrible death. And yet at the same time, that night, he's so present, and he's willing to just be so present to his disciples, and, to share with them, and to give them this way of being, this example to follow. That's something, for one thing, I struggle with, right? Like, if I have something looming the next day, I feel like, I'm not nearly as present to people around me at work or at home, certainly. And yet this abiding presence that Jesus is just fully there. So I don't know. I'm thinking about that. And then with the Easter Vigil, I always, just that in particular, I always think about wonder. That's just the night of wonder. And the world is just so enormous, and there's so many things about it, the wonder of it, and and I think that we don't appreciate that enough. And so something about that. I don't know exactly.
Think that's great. That's what maybe
I just think that's what that night's all about. Like, oh yeah, we are not the center of everything. And, oh my Lord, like, surprise is real, and life opens up, and things change, and oh my gosh.
Wonder is a great theme for Easter.
Totally.
Maybe I'll go there on Easter Sunday. We don't do Easter.
I think that's one thing that we don't preach enough about, wonder. I mean, the reality of God, I think, is an amazing reality. I don't mean that like cool. I mean, just like, like it, and I think that that's a real part of it, because there really is a larger reality than ourselves. So, yeah, wonder.
Well, Jonah, it is a wonder, the way in which God brings us into relationship with other people. And I think we mutually appreciate just how grateful we are that God has brought us together. And I am really grateful for your willingness to share and participate and be present with me in my podcast and share this story.
Yeah.
And just share from your personal experience with friends and colleagues and people we don't even know. But I really believe and trust that it's these kinds of conversations that really give strength to people, and I think mean a great deal. And God and the Holy Spirit, and whatever universe, divine, call it anything you like, really participates in ensuring people hear what they need to hear. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah, I mean, we're not alone, not just with God, but also people. We all go through these things, and life can be hard. I wish if we could own that area, and I think if we could all recognize that and be real and honest about just how tough things can be.
Yes.
So much more loving, supportive, and compassionate towards one another. Honestly, I think going to that place is the way to really bring in, I think, a greater experience of our human life together. So thanks for letting me go there with you today and with everybody here.
Thank you, Jonah. All right. Yeah. I hope you have a wonderful Easter.